Thank you everyone who are listening this podcast. This is Coding Talks with myself, Vishnu Viji. I am a .NET developer with extensive experience in cloud technologies like AWS and Microsoft Azure. Also, I have worked with the GCP as well. I do take sessions about these cloud providers which are available in my YouTube channel and also in this podcast. The YouTube channel is also in the same name as of this podcast. Feel free to listen this podcast, and also the past episodes are available there. And same way in YouTube channel also, all the sessions that I take, live stream sessions as well as recorded sessions are available. If you are interested, please have a look. In addition to that, I am an AWS community builder for storage, and for the past 2 years, AWS has credited me with the title community builder. I have a meetup group called Coding Talks Cloud Computing, where if you join, the joining format is free. You just need to sign up in a meetup and just join that cloud computing, Coding Talks Cloud Computing, and you will get notified about the upcoming sessions and all. I will be mostly taking sessions on YouTube live stream, but in advance I do not to post their sessions and other informations on that meetup group, so you will get notified if you join that meetup group. Today's session I will be planning to talk about Angular. This is not a teaching session at all, because already there are a lot of sessions available out there from different platforms like LinkedIn, Udemy, Pluralsight and so on. So I don't plan to have another session about Angular at all, but what I like to plan in this episode is to convey some ideas that I know about Angular and how I felt about working with Angular. If you check out my podcast, you know that around 1 or 2 years back I have taken some sessions on React.js, which provides an overview about the React.js. A similar way, I plan to talk about Angular.js. Not an planned session, kind of just a rough expression of what I know about Angular, so that those who are familiar with Angular, or maybe even if you're not familiar with Angular, might get some idea about that. No prerequisites are required for listening this podcast. Feel free to listen. Might be lengthy, so feel free to listen according to your convenience. We can start by understanding Angular by contrasting it with the another framework or another library called React.js. Why I mentioned React.js here is that if you search in Google about the web development technologies, even though there are a lot of other technologies out there, still the React.js and Angular are most popular ones. And I believe around 2 years back I gone through a survey. I don't exactly remember which survey is that, but the essence of that survey is that web developers prefer these frameworks in general. And at that time of survey, Angular was getting more popular, but React also has an equal fan base out there. I worked with React as well, and when I worked with React, I felt it like a very easy to approach library where we can start getting into React very easily. The concepts are very easy to understand. But there is a contrast of difference between the way by which Angular architecture is, and also how React is developed. This is because if you look into the React documentation, you can understand that it is actually being used inside Facebook. So they developed it for scaling their application, Facebook, because Facebook has a massive demand, and there is a lot of users simultaneously accessing that application. So scalability, or the way by which an application can scale to the user demands, is a very important requirement for them. They felt that the traditional way of splitting the architecture, web architecture based on model, domain and controller, kind of an MVC pattern, is actually not useful at all. So that is the idea behind React. If you look into the React, you can see that a web application can be developed as an arrangement of different components. That's the way by which React and a developer creates a React application. They create different components. Say for example, if we have a web page, may have different areas. So each area can be considered as a different component, and the developer think about a web page as a set of arrangement of different components. So they ideally prefer to think about one component and they work on that, and then they have an overall idea about how to arrange that component at all. The benefit of this kind of development is that in case if you want to work on a single part of a web application, it can be done very easily. This is similar to the concept of monolith versus microservices. So earlier, many years back, the monolith concept was the only idea that was known to many developers at all. But managing a monolithic application and especially the way by which it can be deployed is very tough, because even when we want to have a change in a single area, a monolith application should be deployed all at once, which is unnecessarily, and also the testing team and others need to ensure that every part of the application is working as expected. This brings a major challenge in deploying the monolith application. So the concept of modular development evolved, where further concepts like service-oriented architecture, modular monolith and other things evolved, which nowadays culminate in the form of architecture called the microservices. So nowadays microservice or more modular kind of application development is more popular. If you look into the websites like Amazon, it's a composition of different business units, like the shopping cart can be considered as one module, the display section can be considered as another module, payment can be considered as another module. So in this way, a website like Amazon is composed of different business modules, and that way an architecture based on business domain, which is called the microservices, is getting nowadays popular. So that same concept has evolved into the front-end architecture as well. So this today's discussion about the Angular, it's actually a front-end based JavaScript frameworks, and if you are familiar with the web development, you might already know that there is no requirement for Angular or React.js for developing a web application at all. With some knowledge about HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and maybe some helpful addition from the jQuery as well, you can develop a decent website using these technologies, and no need for Angular or React at all. But why these frameworks still came up is the question. The main reason is that because of JavaScript was not a kind of an easily maintainable language, because if you add more complexity to a web application, JavaScript becomes unmanageable. And the modern languages like TypeScript and others came up to a great extent to reduce that complexity by by adding static typing over the JavaScript. But still, JavaScript as a language itself is not maintainable. Especially, that JavaScript is kind of a non-static typed language where you can assign a var I is equal to 1 in first line, and on the second line you can replace that with a boolean value. So this provides challenge for the developer to understand what is happening inside the JavaScript, and especially when it evolved to a massive files, then it becomes very difficult to understand what's happening behind the scene. Even if you take a simple JavaScript function, to understand that what is passed into that function requires another look into where it is being called. And also there's a concept called a callback hell is there. So if you use a lot of callback, you will not get any idea about what's happening behind the scene unless you go through the entire code. This brings JavaScript not manageable from the point of view of code management, as well as from the point of view of readability of the code. So that's why the concepts like a TypeScript evolved, and in Angular TypeScript was also added. But same time, even without the TypeScript, there were researches were going on in different organizations like the Facebook, where how they can better develop applications using JavaScript. So that's one of the reasons why these frameworks came out, like React and Angular, where they found an approach which can be used to build rapidly this web application. The idea is called the component-based development, where a web application can be think of as an assembly of different components. So these React and Angular developers may be thinking about a web application in terms of components. So if you are new to this component model, don't worry, it's easy to understand. It's simply this one, like say for example, if you have an application like a Amazon website, or even in a simple website like a login screen and all. So the login part can be think of as an one component, and you can think of the menu as another component. So this way, when we see a web page in our screen, we can identify the different components. So if as a web developer, if you develop a web page with these component idea in mind, you can better develop applications. That means if you have a team of different members, maybe one developer can build one component and another developer can build another component. So now I will tell a bit about the React here, because the reason why I like to mention about React is that if you go through the documentation of React, you can understand why React evolved. So the main thing is, like earlier in JavaScript development, the MVC model, or the model view controller based kind of an architecture, was getting more and more popular. But there the problem is that if you want to make some additions or updations to a page or a single part of a web page, you need to modify many areas at all. So that's one of the major disadvantage that we can experience while developing an MVC based architecture. Maybe the client requires us to add one field in one part of our web application, and for that we need to change three different parts: model, view and controller at all. This brings additional complexity. So React, the team in Facebook realized this, and they said that the MVC is not scalable at all. Actually, it's not an efficient way of developing web applications. So they came up with the idea of component with a language called JSX. So if you have familiarity with React, you know that a component can be considered as a combination of CSS, HTML as well as the JavaScript. So they found a new language for that as well, which can help to better develop a single part of a component without depending any other thing. That means if you open a component, you can have the entire things related to that component there. Entire things means the presentation logic, the data capturing logic and all, and everything is there within that component. So that lies the idea of React, and that way React evolved. Similar time, the Google has came up with a framework called Angular JS. The earlier versions were called as Angular JS. So there the concept is like the same like what the React intended, like the component based web development, but Angular provides more structure to web application. So this is one of the major difference I felt when working with a React application and an Angular application. When I worked with a React application, it's easily understandable. Like if I am developing a list component, if I look on the top section of the list component, I could see codes related to pulling the data from an API, and underneath that I can see some business logic related to that component, and also the presentation HTML and all within that same file itself. Sometimes when React application evolves, maybe that data pulling logic may be moved to some hook or something. So that is common. That's from the point of view of maintainability, but still, if you look into a component in React, you will get an entire picture about everything there, like the data pulling logic, the CSS, the presentation logic, HTML logic, JavaScript. If some DOM manipulation needs to be done, you should have some JavaScript related codes as well, like the event handlers and all. So that is also there within there. So that's one of the core difference I felt when I worked with React and then moved into Angular. So when I moved to Angular, I could see the same component there, but if you look into that component, you could see a list of different files, like the HTML template file is there, then the module is there, then the other component related files are there. So this way, I think around 4 files around you can see in every component in Angular. So this I felt like a bit extra effort, especially when I came from a React background and worked with Angular. For making a simple change or making some simple component, I need to create 4 files in advance for that components. In addition to that, I need to make some other updations as well in different other areas. So this I felt unnecessary initially, but the benefit that I experienced later is like it can help in organization to maintain a structure. So in a way we can say like Angular provides more structure to a web application, because you can have that same structure in React as well. Actually, I like the idea behind React. It's very easy to identify a component and its logic and the data pulling logic all in a single place without looking into multiple places like the Angular. But the thing is like in React, you need to have a thought about how the architecture and structure of the application should look like. Because in React, there is no common way to do a particular thing, especially state management. You can have the state managed in the component itself, or you can move that to some other pattern like Redux or Mobex or something. And also newly the context API is there. So different ways are out there while developing an application. So that means if a developer starts a React application with one particular idea in mind, if he didn't communicate that in the form of a documentation or some way to other developers who will be coming later, then to the newer developers it may not be that much easy to understand what all approach it's actually using there, because there is a possibility. I'm not saying like 100% of time it happens like that, but there is a possibility that at some time it can go wrong, like maybe all the things that can applicable in the JavaScript can also be applicable here. Then in React you can use TypeScript as well. TypeScript reduces some of the disadvantages of JavaScript at all. There are favorisms towards JavaScript and against TypeScript as well. If you search in Google, you can get a lot of such arguments out there. Like many don't prefer the TypeScript at all, but Microsoft when came up with the idea of TypeScript says that it provides a static typing over the JavaScript so that it can benefit the developers, especially say for an example in JavaScript, if you look into a function, you need to think about where that function is actually calling from, and you need to go one by one behind to understand what is happening there. But if you have a static typing over JavaScript in the form of TypeScript, you can take advantage of some of the static typing features. First benefit is like at the compile time itself you can identify some of the errors instead of runtime. The second benefit is like you can easily navigate to different areas of the code base, and you will get an idea what type of parameter, whether it is an int parameter or whether it is a Boolean parameter, is actually passing into the function. So that is on some of the benefits that provide. So because of this benefits that TypeScript provide, Angular in the recent versions of Angular, TypeScript is also included. This was not the case earlier in AngularJS. TypeScript was not there, but when the TypeScript and its features and its benefits became more visible to the developer community, Angular team thought to integrate that in Angular framework. So that way they integrated that. So the recent versions of Angular, if you create, it will be TypeScript. The code behind you want to write is in TypeScript itself. Those who are not familiar about TypeScript, it's worth checking some of the benefits that TypeScript offers. Some of the benefits that I felt is, two of them are I already mentioned. Like one is the benefit that it provides by using the static typing. Second thing is like it brings more maintainability to the code base. It provides more easy navigation, and it provides more help from an editor point, because the editors like VS Code can help it to identify different areas of the code and can provide intelligence and navigational benefits as well. Then the other thing that TypeScript provides is like, see, JavaScript may be evolving at a later phase. So now ECMAScript 5 is there, and maybe the later version will be coming later. So if you write something in TypeScript, you can compile that to a more newer version of JavaScript. So what TypeScript compiler actually does is it grabs all the code that you are writing in TypeScript and compile them to pure JavaScript in an efficient way. So it's not like a developer JavaScript to developer TypeScript to JavaScript conversion, but it's on the level of a kind of a optimized JavaScript. So maybe the code that TypeScript compiles, maybe you may not be familiar with. That's an optimized form of JavaScript. If you want to understand about how a TypeScript compiles that to a pure JavaScript, there are online editors out there. Just have a simple search and you will get an idea. So so this is what I mentioned in the beginning of the session. Like, this is not a teaching session. It's not a structured format to present Angular from base to the advanced as it is, but it's just a rough expression of what I know about Angular. So when we were talking about Angular, we talked about the React.js and also some ideas about the TypeScript as well. So that's the way. Then now those who are coming to the Angular, how they can start working into Angular is one question. So if you are brand new to Angular, ideally you may be starting working on with by installing the Node.js. Similar to the React.js, we need to have a mandatory requirement to install Node.js in advance. The latest version will be preferable. Simply install the Node.js, and once you install the Node.js, you can install the Angular CLI using the npm. So npm is the preferred way by which you can install the required packages into your system. So Node.js is the prerequisite for that. So once you have the Node.js installed, you can use the npm command to install the Angular CLI. The reason why we are installing the Angular CLI is there is an option by which you can create the Angular application using the Angular CLI. So if you search in Google about Angular CLI and how you can create an Angular application from scratch, you will get the command. It's a simple command, and if you run that, it will create the Angular application for you with all the required things and all. The reason why Angular CLI is useful for us is that if you do that bootstrapping, this part is called the bootstrapping, where you assembling the different components required for running an Angular application. So if you do this manually, it will take a lot of time, which is unnecessary as well, because already some others have already found a way to assemble these things for a new project. So they have integrated that in the Angular CLI. So with the help of Angular CLI, you can simply bootstrap a new Angular application. So such an application, if you bootstrap, it will have a set of different structures. We are not going deep into the structure. We are just going through an overall idea only. So there may be an app folder and also the component folder. Then some files like modules and all. So you need to define all different areas for Angular to work on. We can go a bit deep into the Angular as we progress through the episode. Keep in mind that this episode is a bit lengthy, so feel free to listen according to your convenience. There is no need to listen this episode all at once. So part by part you can listen. Anyway, I will be presenting this session all at once. So up to you to listen whatever way you want. So that is one way by which you can create an application, especially if you are brand new to Angular. Second way is like if you are a .NET developer. There is one easy way if you have a version of Visual Studio installed in your machine. A Visual Studio Community Edition is free, so simply install that, and if you install that, simply create a new project, and while you create a new project, simply search for an Angular application. This is the recent addition of Visual Studio, where Angular and React are inbuilt with the Visual Studio itself, so that Visual Studio can help you to bootstrap an application with Angular with the .NET Core as the backend. So the advantage here is that you will get a sample application from Visual Studio, by which you can work and modify, and you can move to your project requirements as you like. So these kind of templates can be used to create a React or Angular application, and the application structure is almost similar for React and Angular. Basically, it have a client app folder where you will be having all the React and or Angular related files, and also a .NET Core behind the scene sample API with some examples as well, so that you can modify and progress. Then also, when you install an Angular application, create an Angular application using Visual Studio, everything by default is wired up by the Visual Studio itself. So you can simply click on the debug and you can run the application. You can make the modification and you can change it. But you may be wondering, like, what about the modifications that you can make? That also can be done. Simply, you can go into the client app folder and you can add packages using npm as you like. The reason for adding packages is, like, as your project evolves, you may be having different requirements for your Angular application. Maybe to say, for an example, if you need a search option, you can install the ng search module, which is available from npm. You can integrate that into your existing Angular application with the help of npm, and then you can add the codes in your Angular application, a few codes into the component files and all, and then that way you can easily wire up an application. You can easily wire up additional features to your existing Angular application that is created by Visual Studio. So these are the two approaches that are available for those who are coming new to Angular. Then what about the experienced developers? Maybe you are working in some organization and maybe client requests you to work on an existing Angular project, maybe to add some extra features and all. In that case, it's a bit challenging because Angular evolved from Angular JS to the current version of Angular. The thing is, like, different developers who developed this Angular in the past may have formed different ways. Just like I explained now, when a brand new developer comes to Angular, they can use an Angular CLI to bootstrap a simple Angular application without an backend API, and they can later create a backend API node. While if you create, but at the same time, if you are a brand new and if you are creating an application with the help of a Visual Studio template, then Visual Studio will be creating on .NET Core API and the client app folder and all. The difference is that the structure by which while the main structure of the Angular component and other things remains the same, the way by which it is integrated as a project differs. So you need to first understand how the existing application that you will be going to work on is wired up. So different developers prefer different way in the past too. So you need to just have a look on the different files. The one recommended approach that I prefer is first find out the Angular related folder. So you can see a component based folder, and if you have found that file and if you have found that package.json and other related Angular based files inside your existing project, then you are somewhere near to the existing app architecture, and you can easily identify how it is working at all. Basically, Angular, as you know, is a front-end framework. So Angular couldn't work alone of its own. It needs a support of an API. So most of your project might be have an API either attached with that Angular project, or maybe you will be having an Angular project by itself, and it will be calling it. There will be a configuration where you can configure the APIs that will be pulling the data from somewhere. So first I need to understand about this. So when I actually started working with the Angular, I found an application where it's using a combination of the older Angular JS as well as the newer Angular. So it's used a combination of that approach. This way, different approaches, different developers can made upon. You need to be aware that while starting working on the Angular application. Then usually Angular, if you are creating an Angular application using Angular CLI, and if you are integrating that to Angular a backend API and all, then whenever you are making some change, you need to build that and compile that, because Angular needs compilation. So you need to think about whether the particular project that you are encountering actually requires a compiling to Angular or not. So compiling means it's just a simple step like ng space build, which it will compile all the Angular to a required JavaScript. Basically what Angular does is it's a framework, so you will be writing code according to the Angular framework conventions and all, and finally it would be outputting it as simple JavaScript where it can be run like a normal web application. So for the browser who receives the actual code has no idea about whether it's developed using an Angular or a React, because it's actually getting that pure JavaScript which are compiled by these frameworks compilers itself. So from our point of view as a developer, we will be working on Angular and React. So that's the thing. Then okay, then the next thing that you should keep in mind is that if you develop an application, if you create a new Angular application with the help of Visual Studio, you don't need to recompile it every time when you make a change, because the underlying scripts and all have assembled there, and it's already wrapped by the Visual Studio itself. So you can simply debug it and it will run the code and compile the code from behind the scene. So you can modify the code without running explicitly the ng build by yourself. But in the case of some existing applications like the one I mentioned, we have to go to a particular folder and we need to run the ng build to compile the new Angular version to a different one, because the developers followed a custom way to integrate the newer version with the older version. So that thing you need to keep in mind while working on the maintenance project, because you will not have any clue how it is going on. Then the other difference I felt with regard to the Angular versus React is that in an organization where there are a lot of developers who are working on in a web application, having a structure or architecture that this Angular kind of framework provides is in fact can be useful. It can also be applicable for React as well, because React, even though it's a lightweight library, doesn't provide a fixed architecture or structure at all. In React, using React, you can develop an application using different ways. But in Angular, especially even if for a component, if you open a component in a component folder in Angular, you can see that they followed a structure there. I believe this can help to those who are not familiar with JavaScript and the structure and the advanced or the even a medium concepts in medium experience in JavaScript, because newer developers who work with JavaScript can create a web application in multitude of ways. So that means if a developer is developing an application and when it's handed over to another developer, he feels it challenge to understand what's going on behind the scene. So there, this structuring that this Angular provides can actually help in a way, because a folder structure exists within Angular. More structure exists within Angular compared to React, and it can help the development team to maintain a code base that has a fixed structure. That means if a newer developer coming to the team, and if he or she gets some idea about Angular, then he can easily follow the existing application that other developers worked on, because they have followed the Angular style and conventions. That's the benefit that the structuring provides to Angular, but it comes at a cost, because if you look into Angular component, there is different file structures and there. So when a structure is there, it has to follow a certain conventions that these frameworks demand. That means it's additional burden for you. Same like what the React developers in Facebook suggested, that MVC is not actually a scalable development experience for web application, because to make a modification they need to do multiple areas. So such disadvantages exist within in a greater deal in Angular compared to React because of this structuring. But as I pointed out, structuring can also sometimes help. So based on that, we can select. If you ask me which framework do you prefer for new application, because I have some familiarity with the React, I prefer React only, because it's more lightweight and more easy to understand. But if we are working in a team of developers who are not familiar that much with JavaScript, who doesn't know about any structure applications at all, who doesn't agree with a common structure among the different teams, then Angular can be helpful. There is no fixed rules out here, and neither on framework or library is greater than another. But from a personal perspective, I like React a bit more compared to Angular. Now we can look into some of the more advanced concepts that are related to Angular. So now it's 1 hour over. We were contrasting the differences with regards to Angular and okay, so far we were contrasting about the difference between Angular and React. We discussed each has its own advantages, and I mentioned some of the advantages that I felt. Maybe you will be feeling some other things. Now like I already mentioned, if you are brand new to Angular, you can use the Angular CLI, or you can use the Visual Studio to create an Angular application for you. If you simply use Angular CLI, you will get a new Angular application. The thing is, like, Google invested heavily in creating this framework. So when you use Angular CLI to create a new Angular application, you can ensure that it creates, the CLI tool will create a complete structured application with appropriate config files, then the best practices, file name structures and all, and everything is wired up by that CLI itself, Angular CLI itself. So you can simply modify and work on. Then if you are using Visual Studio, they are also using this Angular CLI behind the scene, but they will also provide the backend .NET Core API as well, so that you can work with the API to pull data to Angular application. Unless if it's a non-data application, without an API, an Angular application by itself can't stand alone that much. Data is the core of majority of the web application. You definitely need an API, especially if it's a web application. So that means if you don't have an API behind the scene, then considering creating an application with the help of Visual Studio will benefit you, because they also create a API behind the scenes, so you can simply take advantage of that. If you don't want Visual Studio, and if you're against Microsoft in some way, and if you prefer open source way only, then you have to install the Node.js first, as I mentioned before. The particular thing you need to remember here is you need to install the Node.js 14 and above, because that's a mandatory requirement. And once you installed the Node.js, you can install the different npm packages. How we implementing an application, Angular application in our system is through the Angular CLI. So first you should install the Node.js. It provides the platform, and then you need to install the npm. You need to install the Angular CLI using the npm. So the command is simple. Simply run npm space install. Then you should provide a flag like -g. Then space Angular CLI. So once you have that Angular CLI installed, you can next bootstrap an Angular application. And the command is also similar. You can search in Google and understand that. If you want to know that now itself, the command is simple, like ng space new space the name of your application. So if it is an application like my first Angular application or my favorite Angular application, you can simply provide that. Keep in mind that while you create in this way, using the ng space new slash space application name, Angular CLI will ask a few questions, like whether you need Angular routing and what type of style sheet format do you prefer. So there are multiple ways by which we can have style sheets, like a CSS, which is the normal one, or less, or Sass. Unless you are not sure about less and Sass, it's preferred to go on ahead with the CSS. Also, the routing is also important, because if the customer wants accessing different part of your application by providing different URLs, you need the support of Angular routing as well. So it is better to always give yes to that one. And the style sheet format, you can simply select the CSS, default CLS. So in this way, if you provide and click and enter the command line, Angular CLI will create a fully functional Angular app. But keep in mind that it will be a basic application that can help you to understand about the structure and all. but you need to work on to add additional features according to what your client or what you require from your application. So the main thing you need to look on is like there will be a source folder if you create an Angular application using the Angular CLI, and inside the source there will be an app folder. So that's the default one. There you will, if you open that app folder, you will have a set of files there. So these files are according to the structure what Angular wants. So if you are creating a component, it should have this structure. Say for example, if you open that app folder, you will have a CSS file there, then an HTML file there, then a spec file there which is used for testing and other purpose. You can test individual part of your application, front end part just alone with the help of Angular. So spec is there, then the app.component.ts, which is the actual component logic file there. Then there is a module file also there. So module can be considered in Angular as kind of a container for all the different components. So if you have an application and if you have a set of component associated or related, you can wrap it inside a module. So that's the concept of module. So more details about these things are available in the documentation. Feel free to have a look on that. Then once you have a new application created using the ng new, then you need to run, you may be interested to run the application and want to see how it looks like, and you can simply run the command on that command line. So how you run that command line is actually you should open the command prompt if you are in Windows, or if you are in Linux also you can use the command, and then you need to navigate inside to the root directory where your Angular files reside. The easy way to identify the root directory is that you can see a package.json file there. So go to that directory. First you need to install all the npm packages there. So if you are creating a new Angular application, by default all the required packages will be installed as part of the new thing, or when you run the ng serve. But if you are opening an existing Angular application, initial time you need to run the npm install to get all the packages that are mentioned in the package.json to be installed. So these packages are from npm repository that are required in your system or the system where the Angular application is running. So that command is important, and after that command then you need to provide a command called ng-serve, which will open the application, and it will be run on an default host, and the port name will be I think around 4200 or something. If you want to change that host and port, you can have that option as well. Please refer to the documentation for more details. So the default page you can view in that way by running the ng-serve command. Keep in mind that if you create a new application using the Angular CLI, you will get a template that is provided by the Angular CLI. But at the same time, if you create a new Angular application with the help of Visual Studio, Visual Studio will be providing a template. And the look and structure looks a bit different. Mainly if you look into that template that is provided by Visual Studio, you can understand that they have integrated that API as well. So there is a data component also there, which you can use to understand, which you can refer and understand how the data pulling logic in Angular actually works, which can be used for modifying and customizing your new application. Then if you have an existing application, you might be wondering how you want to update an existing application. The preferred way by which you can update your existing application is you need to uninstall your older version of Angular CLI, and you need to install the latest version of Angular CLI followed by the update command. So the update command is simple. You need to go inside that directory where package.json exists and simply run ng space update space the Angular core and the Angular CLI commands. So there is you need to update these two things. So these two, Angular core and Angular CLI, are the main ones that are required for your application to run. You need to update that. Keep in mind that Angular comes out with a new version every I think 6 months or so. So be first, before updating the Angular application, make sure that you check out the documentation and all to see any breaking changes are there. Sometimes when updating an legacy application to a newer version, you need to make changes in the folder structure and all, or the conventions that newer Angular application demands. So keep that in mind while updating your application. Now you may be wondering, you are able to create an application and you are able to run that, then what all are the different files that are inside the Angular application, and why each one, what's the relevance of each of these files. I'm not going too much detail into these things as this is not an Angular course at all, but understanding about the different files can be helpful. So the first file that I like to mention is the package.json. So this file is the one which specifies the Node.js dependencies and all, and also some of the TypeScript transpilers or specific command lines that you can use in your application. So these are all defined in the package.json. Then also in the newer versions of Angular, TypeScript is inbuilt within. So you can see a tsconfig.json where you can set the TypeScript related informations. Then the angular.json is there where you can specify the Angular application homepage and also the main source file. So the main file in an Angular application or the startup file is the source that /main.ts, which is responsible for starting the application. So, and also there is one page called the index.html. So if you open the source /index.html, you can see a tag called app root inside there. So this is as per the time of this recording on 11th of March 2023. So the maybe at the later version may differ if you are installing a newer version of Angular, but the idea is that index.html contains an app root component, and actually this app root component is a tag is actually used by the Angular framework to replace the codes based on how you navigate. So if you navigate to localhost /home, actually Angular will pre-populate all the required HTMLs within that app root area. Similarly, if you navigate to a different page like localhost /about or some other page, then or contact page, then Angular will, based on how you configured your application, Angular, how you define the routing, how you define the components and all, based on that Angular will pre-populate the required HTML inside the app root component. So that's the way by which it's actually working behind the scene. Then the main.ts. So if you look into the angular.json, you can see that the main source file that your Angular applications look on initially is the main.ts. So there we can define the app module and all other things. Then inside that app module, if you look on, you can see the different modules that your application is using. So if it's a simple application, you can see the app component, then the browser module and all. This means that as your application advances, you will be having extra information inside that app module. Imagine if you are bootstrapping all these things initially from scratch, it will be very challenging. So that's lies the importance where having a tool like Angular CLI will be helpful for you. Then the main thing you need to understand about Angular is the component. That means if you are developing a web application, you should think in terms of component. This is same for React as well. There also you need to think about the component, but the way by which both frameworks, actually React is a library, so it's not a framework, but the way by which these both React and Angular works is a quite different way. In Angular, you need to specify a fixed structuring to the components. This is what I mentioned earlier, like if you have some structuring in your application, it can help in a great way to maintain the code base. So that same applies while you create a component for Angular as well. Those who are not familiar with Angular, either Angular or React, when they first time comes to this Angular and React, the idea of component may be a bit difficult to understand. So they need to revise their thinking a bit more, especially if they are coming from pure JavaScript or other backgrounds, because the concept of the component may not be familiar to them. One thing we can relate to this is like maybe that developer will be working on pure HTML and they will be thinking while developing a web page as a single page with a single HTML file and all. So the idea of component or the parts of the different areas, that idea may not be familiar to them. So the idea behind the Angular way of developing or the React development is you should think in terms of the web page as a set of component. You need to visualize how a web page can have different component. If it's a simple web page like a login page, then you can think about the menu as one component, and each element inside that menu can also be another component as well. So in this way, you should split your component to the maximum so that maximum granularity can be achieved, and that way you can independently change a part of a web page without affecting the other part. So there lies the concept of this modular development, similar to what we discussed in the initial episode, where the idea of monolith versus microservices come into existence. So that way, as the UI development became more and more complex, especially for complex UI application, this kind of individual splitting into components can really helpful for the developers, especially in maintaining the application. Now we can look into a simple component file inside the Angular. You could see like there is a main template URL template file that you need to define. So this is the HTML page that actually renders the data. Then there would be other files like the CSS file where how the file is actually, how the actual template is actually displaying. Then there will be the associate logic that are inside that component file, where you define that state of your application and other details like the event handler and all. Maybe your component requires to pull data from somewhere, so you need to call a service behind the scene and you need to wrap it up to the component. So service is there. It can help, having a separate service file can help to create, can help to make the code a bit more structured in a way, like the API calls will be there. API calling part will be there in the service, and that service will be injected to the corresponding component, and that way you can use that service file which can be called from inside a component to actually call an API. So in this way, for everything a structure is there within the Angular, which can help if you are developing in a team environment. That lies another question, like whether this Angular can helpful for a freelancer kind of person, where that person is the only one working in that project. Yes, for him also it can help in a way. Like the reason is being a framework, Angular can provide a great deal of support utilities, which we will discuss as we go through the episode. So such thing can be utilized there, and also the structuring, whether it's for a single member or for the another member, still can help, because even if a freelancer is actually working on a project, and if you want to hand over that to some other person, or even for himself to understand at a later point of time, it can be helpful to have a structure in place. The same applies for React as well. Even though React doesn't provide a steady or a rigid structure as like Angular, still an expert React developer can have a structure in place in advance. Not as much complex as this one. There the concept is a bit different, where inside a single component and inside a single file, every logic will be there, and there the concept of hook and other things exist to make things more better, to include the concept of event handlers and all. Then the way by which it differs, the Angular differs from React, is that the concept of binding. In Angular, it supports two-way binding, where you can bind the data from your HTML to the JavaScript and reverse way. But in the React, actually it's an on-way binding. That means you need to, whenever you make a modification, whenever you want to make a modification in the UI, you need to change the associated state behind the scene, and that will be kind of an on-way binding. So that way React will automatically populate the front end according to the state change, and you need to be focusing on changing the state from the UI. But at the same time, in the Angular, there is a concept called the two-way binding. We will discuss that as we go along. Once you create an application, a basic application using Angular, CLI or Visual Studio, the next challenge for you as a Angular developer is how to create additional Angular elements for your app development. You can't just satisfied with the default components that Angular built for you, and creating a new Angular component. If you look into a single component, you can see different files there, and manually creating these files is possible, but it's not an efficient way. So how you can do that is what we are going to discuss now. You can use that same CLI, where you use that CLI to create an application. That same CLI can be used for create any of your Angular artifact as well. So this artifact means additional components, additional Angular related items that are required for your application development. Component is one thing, then directive is another thing, pipe is there. Then for calling the API and all, service is required. Then might be you require a new class, new interface. Sometimes when your application evolves, more and more components will be added, which should be contained within a module. So module will be required, and in other cases web kind of a web worker will be required. In all of these cases, you can use that same CLI to generate these different artifacts for your Angular application. Say for example, if you want to create a list component for your application, you can navigate to your Angular application folder where your package.json resides. So that's the root of your Angular application. If you're if you're created using Visual Studio, that will be your client app folder. So you need to navigate to there, then simply run the command called ng space g space. If you want to create a component, you need to provide component followed by the new component name. So the thing you need to be aware of here is like you need to follow a convention. Like if your app, the component name should follow a convention. So you should follow like if you want to create a new component with a particular name, so you need to create that component. So that way you need to properly define these things while creating your application. For example, if you are creating a component called list component, it should be like ng space g space component followed by list. And once you enter, a component folder will be created. And if you look inside that, you can see an associated HTML file, a spec file will be there, then a CSS file, then a TypeScript module file will be there. So the everything structure can be seen here. So that's the visible difference you can expect from an Angular application. Then in addition to that, it also so when you create a new component, the main thing you should notice is the you want to style the you need to sometimes you need to style the component, or you want to define how the layout of that component will be. So that all will be defined inside the HTML and CSS folder, which you can find inside that component. About the other things related to the what data that should be presented inside that component, that all will be there inside that component.ts file, which you can find inside that component folder. So if you have multiple components, each component will have a different component folder, and inside that component folder there will be a component ts files where you can write the exact code for how your component wants to display. If it's a list, then definitely you need an array of list, which you can pull from some data API or somewhere, or you can hard code it here itself. Hard coding is not at all practical most of the case, but for the sake of understandability, you can simply hard code that, and then you can display that to the once you define a array here inside that component.ts, you can call that array from within the HTML file as well. You can loop there and you can display the data to the user. While displaying, you can use additional pipes and all. Say for example, if you want to format your data according to the time, you can use a pipe and display accordingly. Similar way, other pipes you can use a custom pipe. In some cases, if you want to format your data according to a different naming, a different convention, you can do that as well using the pipe. Also, the related to styles, I already mentioned, like you can alter the CSS. Sometimes you need to define some styles for your overall application. So in that case, you can define a style inside the Angular folder, that is the source/style.css, where it defines the global styles. And if you look into the angular.json, you can see the reference of the style.css there. That means the global styles can be defined here, while if you want to provide a specified style for a specified component, you can provide that inside that component CSS folder as well. That's how it's working. Once again, common styles will come under the global style.css, which can be found inside the source/style.css, and the same thing is also defined inside the angular.json as well. While if you want to provide individual styling for individual components, that can be provided inside the component CSS file. Then without routing is also another important concept in Angular. Without routing, an Angular application is not that much useful at all, because if it's a single page application, Angular is called a SPA. Actually, it's a single page application. You can scroll from the top to down and you can view that. But in reality, a web application will be having different pages. Like it can be the user will be taking different URLs. So localhost/home shows the home page, while localhost/about will show the about page. So there is where the importance of routing applies. In order to have a routing and navigation to a particular component, you need the support of a routing dependency. So that is called Angular/router. Don't worry, while you created an application using the Angular CLI, Angular CLI will create this Angular router also for you. In case if you not found that inside your package.json, you can install that explicitly, but usually it will be installed by default for all your application, whether you created using the Angular CLI or using the Visual Studio version as well. It's fine. That means you can create different component. Maybe you can have a home component, you can have a list component, maybe you can have additional component called a comments component or something. And if you want to have a URL and navigate to that component in the form of different pages, then you need to define a routing table. So the routing table is defined inside the source/app/app-routing.module.ts. So if you open that file, once again the file is source/app/app-routing.module.ts. So if you open that, you can see that routing defined here. So based on that routing, so the path, you can see the path there, roots equal to, in an array you define the path and the component. So based on how the URL will be, and that is identified on the path defined here, it will be redirected to a particular component. So in an Angular application, the concept of base href is also important. So this base URL is defined inside the index.html, and that's the base URL for your application, and all the other URLs that you are defined inside the app.routing.module.ts are actually relative to this base URL. So the base URL that is defined inside the index.html is the main thing, and all other URLs that are defined inside the routing module.ts will be relative to this one. So that's the way by which it works. And also if you want to navigate to a page from within one page, say for example in the home page, if you want to provide a link to navigate to a list page, so list page can be another component, then you can use the ahref equal to that particular slash list or something, or also you can use a router link. So if you define a router links, like a router link is a kind of an Angular tag, that means it will automatically consider the URL as relative to the base URL which you defined in the index.html. Then when you develop an Angular application, another consideration that you need to consider is the binding, data binding. Compared to React, where there is only one-way binding is possible, Angular supports two-way binding as well. That means you can bind from a model to that is defined in a component model to your actual model component HTML, and vice versa. Two-way binding is possible. Details about the two-way bindings can be found inside the Angular documentation. So that is not out of scope of this podcast. It's not easy to mention all of that things here. You can check out that. So two-way binding is possible. It's the examples are also provided there. Also, the thing is like you can also have the idea of delayed data bindings until done can be implemented using Angular. So that's an enhanced way of this two-way binding. Then this two-way binding actually helps you to define a component model to UI, to the actual HTML to display the data, while same time this two-way binding allows you to return back the data from UI to component to update data in the model. And sometimes you want to delay updating the model value until the user has tabbed out of a text box or something. Because say for example, if a user is typing a number in a text box column, no need to update that model until the user actually completes the entire digits in a text box. So in that case, you can achieve the delayed data binding. So this is applicable for two-way data binding. So this delayed data binding can be applied there with the help of blur and change events. So that means when the user navigates out of or move the focus out of the text box, the data can be updated back into the component. Then another thing as a web developer you need to consider while developing a web application is the concept of decision and iteration. So decision means that it's a very important one in developing web applications. Suppose we want to decide how we want to display the data. One example can be like, imagine there is a student list component where it displays the list of students that have completed a particular requirement. So we need to show a status column, and the status column should show whether the student completed requirement or not, should be based on a decision. So in that case, Angular provides the if-else decision directives. So these are called directives. So we understood about the components, modules. So components can be considered as individual part of the web application, and then the module can be considered as a container where all the components can be held within. So for a simple web application, might be one module only be there, while as the web application evolves, more and more components, more and more modules will be added, which can hold the related components underneath. So module can be considered as a kind of a container. Similar way, to enhance these components, we can use the directives. Simply presenting a data inside the component is not that much efficient. Sometimes we want to show the data based on some decisions. So for that, you can use structural decision directives. One of the main one is like ngIf, and you can provide a condition there and display. The syntax of that is available in the documentation. ngIf is used for a conditional rendering of a particular part of your template. So that means you can go inside a component, open that HTML page, and then you can put this ngIf condition and alter the HTML accordingly so that it can provide a conditional rendering. Similarly, sometimes you need to do a bit more conditional rendering called the branch based rendering, where you can depend on the ng switch statement as well. This is similar to the switch and if statements in other languages like C#. So Angular borrowed that same concept from other languages and implemented here in this UI framework as well. ngIf and ngSwitch can be used. ngIf for simple conditional rendering, and this ngSwitch for more branch based rendering. Similarly, like I mentioned, for a list component like list students or something, we have an array of data inside a JavaScript array variable, but we should have a way to show that data inside the HTML. Those of you who are familiar with the JavaScript may know that we can simply put a for each and append that HTML tag and display all the data, but that is not that much efficient from a developer point of view. So Angular provides a ng4 attribute where you can simply define the ng4, and the syntax you can check out in the documentation. The syntax is much simpler. Instead of writing lengthy codes as that of in the native JavaScript, you can simply use that ng4 command, ng4 directive. It's not command actually, sorry, it's actually a directive, and that way you can show the data accordingly. Then the concept of this same there are some additional things also you can implement, which is based on this conditional directives. You can also data bind CSS class and styles, so that based on a condition you can provide a particular style for your web application. So these are some of the main things that can help while developing an Angular application. There are additional things also as well, but these are some of the main things that are main things that are applicable for a Angular application. Then the concept of pipes is also helpful in addition to this conditional directives. Conditional directives can help to show a data based on a condition, but what about if you want to further enhance the way by which we display the data? One example is like we have a variable that has some value associated with that, but we are getting a requirement like we should show that all data in lowercase. If you are aware about JavaScript, you can understand that simply at the model level itself, you can change that to lower, and you can simply lower or transform the text to a lowercase. But Angular, from a point of view, to make things easier, they provide a kind of a pipe where you can append that to your existing data variable inside your HTML. So that means if there is a data called a title, there is a variable called a title that you are calling inside the Angular HTML, then you can simply pipe it. Means you can put a pipe symbol, and then you can provide a pipes that are provided by Angular. So I think around 10 plus, around 10, exactly not sure, around 10 plus pipes are provided by Angular, including lowercase, uppercase, title case is there. Then if you have a JavaScript object and if you want to display that as a JSON, there's a JSON pipe there. Then number pipe is there, which formats the number as text. Also date pipe is there if you want to display date in a particular format. Percent pipe is there, currency pipe is there. So different kinds of pipes are supported by Angular. The idea is to help you to display the data according to what the user expects. Also, there are some additional pipes also, like a slice, which creates a new list or string based on the main list, and it can slice the data and show according to the customer requirement. Also, the plural select async pipes are there. Then the concept of asynchronous data in Angular is also worth understanding, because most of the time web applications need to deal with some kind of an asynchronous data. For example, some calculation may be doing by some job or worker, or sometimes the REST API that your Angular application calling will take some more time to return the data. So in that case, it have to deal with asynchronous data. So there are two ways by which you can handle the async data in a web application. One is through a promise, and another one is through an observable. So promise is kind of an on-off asynchronous result where it will wait for a promise and then display the data, while the observable can be think of as a kind of a stream of emitted values from the source. So this observable you can include in an Angular app if you want to display a stream of data directly to the front end as it is coming from the back end. But this is not there in the Angular. You should add an external dependency called RxJS. And if you want to learn more about this observable class, you can check out the ReactiveX observable, which provides more details on that package. There is one correction I want to mention here. Like in Angular, when you create an Angular application using the CLI, this RxJS will be automatically installed as part of that. So you don't need to explicitly add that. So if you open the package.json, you can see that RxJS there. So that means it will be automatically added, and you can use observable if you want. Then in addition to these things, sometimes you want to capture the inputs from the user in the form of forms. So for that you can add the dependency using an npm called Angular forms, and the syntax for using this Angular forms is also provided in the documentation. By installing this Angular forms, you can use that inside your Angular application and take advantage of some of the if you look in the documentation, you can see how Angular forms can be used to efficiently display form and to capture input from there. Once you understand the structure, it will be effectively helpful for you to understand how you can use that forms to build different kinds of complex forms for your application. I think I have covered enough of the main things that are required for developing an Angular application. Another thing is, like, when you start developing, sometimes according to the customer requirements, you may need to display the data in a particular format, and like I mentioned, there are different pipes that are provided by Angular application which can help you in that context. But sometimes those ready-made pipes that are provided by Angular are not just sufficient. In that case, you might need to create a custom pipe where Angular provides the provision to create a custom pipe as well. You can use the same Angular CLI to create a custom pipe as well. It creates a dummy pipe. You need to tweak the logic to suit according to your requirement, and once you tweak the logic, then you can use that custom pipe inside your Angular application. See, this is not absolutely required in most of the project. In most of the time, the input pipes are sufficient to do these things, but sometimes you need to create this custom pipe. So it depends upon how your project. Before we winding up this session and this episode, I would like to mention a few more additional things which I observed both in React and also in Angular. Both are actually a kind of a component based web development practice. So when you develop your application, and when it gets more and more complex, you will be developing too much of a components, and you may end up in a thing like how to properly arrange the component. In that case, you can consider thinking of splitting the components into more modular components. Like if you don't get a control of how a component displays the data, then you can further divide that component as your application evolves. And also there is an idea of high level component which is common to both the Angular as well as for React. A high level component is simply a component which gets data from somewhere, and it's kind of a parent component, and it will pass the data into lower level components. That means there will be a main component, and underneath that a subcomponent, and so on. So how you pass the data from a high level component to a low level component? In the low level component or the child component, you can decorate the property with an input attribute, and in the high level component you can assign a value to this calling child property. So in this way, the parent or the container component can pass the data using the input property which are defined by those childs and pass the data underneath. So this needs a bit of careful thought about how you define the components and all. Example, if there is a, say for example, a shopping list component, you can have further child components underneath that, and the way by which how you define the components helps in overall maintenance of your project. The more modular your component is, more efficient you can alter that component without affecting the other components. Same time, you should have an understanding about the high level component as well, because then only you can create that parent component in advance and then pass the data underneath. Sometimes once we define a component, then we will be understanding like, okay, let's split into further into more child component and then pass the data on to there. So this applies both to the React as well as to Angular. It will be better to keep this in mind. Then once you have a component like this, then you can bind the events, or you can bind the handlers associated with there. If it's a simple component, you don't need to emit an event or anything, but in the case of multiple components, you can emit an event from a component by using a defined event emitter as a property as an output, and that way you can emit an event and pass the event data to some other component. So this way you can define all the different components and you can pass the data in different way across that. So this is not normally applicable for a simple Angular application, but as your application grows up, these things should be considered. Also, you should aware about the different hooks that are available in Angular, which is called a lifecycle hook. So init, at the time of initialization of a component, its init hook is called, where you can provide any code for initialization of the component. Say for example, if a list component is loading and you want to do some logic there, you can have that init hook there. Then also you can use the event handler. So say for example, if you want to have a button on inside a component, and when you click on that, some event needs to happen, then you can define a suitable event handler, and you can call that event handler from within the button on click, and then inside the event handler that you can define within that component dot module, then component within that component dot ts you can write the specific logic for handling how that event handler interaction should take place. Then as you develop your application, some of the best practices that you can also consider, these are not again applicable in normal Angular development, but as you evolved, you can observe these kind of things. Say for example, say if you have a component called a list components, which is responsible for displaying the data which is received from an API. Can be some REST API or some other API that you are calling from your component. Usually your initial intention or initial way by which you will be putting that REST service call is, you may be include that in your component itself. This will be working, but this is not suggested, because as you put more and more such REST calls inside your component, it will be cluttered, your component code. So instead of that, you should put that REST calling functionality in a reusable service classes, so that the advantage is that multiple or similar other components can also call that REST API. if you don't put that this kind of shared codes like calling REST services or accessing state in a local storage in a common area, like a kind of a reusable service classes, whenever they are required, you need to multiple times define that multiple places, which will be challenging, especially if there is an API change, you need to define it multiple areas. So be aware of all those things. Put this kind of functionality, shared functionalities in reusable service classes and inject those services into the components or your required components as whenever you are required. So you can define a service, but it's not mandatory that you should inject at all the components. According to your priority, you can define that, and according to your requirement, you can define that and inject in as you can record. Also, the dependency injection is supported by Angular. That means in the component constructor, you can define the services you want to inject as parameter, and automatically Angular will inject the suitable objects. So the dependency injection, how it works in Angular is the root module which provides services, and then the Angular injects these services into the component constructors. So from the root module, we create the service, and then we define the service, and then the Angular injects these services into the different components. Then a similar way, like while we think about the best practice, this REST API calling and moving it into a service, you can either create a service by yourself, or better, you can delegate the task to the Angular CLI so that it can create a service class. So this creation of REST services are basically fundamental in most of the Angular application, because without data, Angular application can be a simple display of static data and it not be of that much useful, because Angular application becomes effective when it displays dynamic data. It doesn't need a round trip for the entire HTML to go back to the server, like as in the case of an older ASP .NET Web Forms and similar technologies. But here only the data is actually the parameter is actually going back to the server, and the data is retrieving in the form of REST API. So this REST API concept is mainly fundamental to most of the Angular application. Then so these are some of the things I think I have covered enough of that, and the episode went a bit lengthier than that what I expect, but I hope it gives enough of the information about an overview of the different Angular concepts. So thank you everyone for listening this episode. I will come up with another episode soon. So thank you very much.